Don't ever call HP technical support, by the way.
Okay. How many of you have brothers or sisters? And how many of you would discriminate against your brother or sister if he or she was homosexual? So if none of us would discriminate against our brother or our sister for being homosexual, then why are there still so many hate crimes and discrimination against homosexuals in America today? My brother, the one on the left, because I'm the one on the right, is actually homosexual, and I still love him as much today as I did the day that he came out to me. His name is Josh, and he's majoring in musical theater over at Western Michigan University. And frankly, you couldn't tell he was homosexual unless he told you. I don't know how important family bonds are to each of you, but to me, it's the second most important thing in the world, second only to God. So when I discovered my brother was homosexual, I became curious about the research that was being done. Had he simply chose this lifestyle, or was there evidence to say that he was born this way? After doing much research from accredited sources, I have discovered that there are 4 main fields which are being researched right now: psychological, physiological, glandular, and genetics, that are leading scientists to believe that homosexuality is in fact an inherited characteristic rather than a choice. I will start with the research being done in the genetic field, as I am sure is what most of you are most interested in. In 1993, Dean Hamer and his co-workers did a study on 32 sets of brothers. 23 out of the 32 sets had the same genetic material. In 1991, Bailey and Pillar, 2 scientists out of the University of Connecticut, did a study on twins. They did 100 monozygotic twins, which is that when it's one zygote between the two, same genetic material. 100 dizygotic twins, which means there's 2 different zygotes, and 100 brothers who were adopted by homosexual men. Their research showed that 52% of the monozygotic twins were both homosexual, 22% of dizygotic twins were both homosexual, and 11% of the adoptive brothers were both homosexual. The stats for women only varied by a few percentage points. All of this information together basically says that homosexuality is at least 50% accountable, or genetics is at least 50% accountable for homosexuality. They also found a region on the X chromosome called XQ28. XQ28, which they believe is linked to homosexuality. They can't yet call it the gay gene because they don't have enough evidence for it, but they are currently in the process of doing more research. This same chromosome does not affect females in their research, so they believe that females are merely carriers to their son. So although a single gay gene has not yet been found to completely prove homosexuality is an inherited characteristic, there's also research to show that it's not a behavioral quality. Before 1957, the APA, American Psychological Association, classified homosexuality as a mental disease rather. In 1957, a scientist named Karen Hooker did the first psychological test for homosexuality. She found homosexual and heterosexual men with similar IQs, education level, age, and she put them through 3 different tests. The results were tabulated from multiple psychologists, and they concluded a 0 correlation between social determinism and sexuality. Her research was so good that the APA now calls sexual orientation not a choice, rather that it emerges from most people in early adolescence with no prior sexual experience. There's also been much work done in the physiological field, or the anatomical size differences in the homosexual and heterosexual men's brains. In 1990, a scientist named D.F. Schwab first discovered that the hypothalamus in homosexual men was almost twice as big as that in heterosexual men. He also found that the suprachiasmatic nucleus, same results, was twice as big in homosexual men than in heterosexual men. And Laura S. Allen had a similar discovery of the anterior commissure, which is another section of the brain. Now the importance of this is that scientists do understand now that the anatomical size of the brain is minutely, if at all, affected. Meaning if a man or a woman was repeatedly acting homosexual, their brain size would not change at all, or would change so minutely that they wouldn't even be able to pick it up. This was huge, and it gave great grounds that homosexuality is biological and not social. And finally, there was research done by Fred Dolkeman of Stanford University on rats to show the glandular effects of homosexuality. His study says that there's a certain stage in the rat, as a rat fetus, that the fetus is exposed to superfluous testosterone that will trigger the creation of testes. If the testosterone is not present, the rat will continue to become a female. If the testosterone is present, it becomes a male. Now, at earlier stages, scientists would inject androgen, the male hormone, in different amounts into these rats. The rats which received sufficient amounts of androgen displayed normal aggression towards female rats, more or less mounting them. The male rats which received deficient amounts of androgen were actually more submissive to the male rats, meaning they would allow other male rats to mount them. Homosexual characteristics of rats, basically. This was same in females. Now what's important about this is that the production rates of testosterone and androgen is 100 times greater in humans, which means that the balance could be much more thrown off. So as you can see, there's a lot of research that is leading scientists to believe that homosexuality is an inherent characteristic rather than something that people want to be born with. And although there hasn't been a single gay gene yet discovered, the research of Haber, Bailey, and Pillard in the genetic field, the psychological tests of Karen Hooker, the physiological size differences of homosexual and heterosexual men, as shown by Laura S. Allen and D.F. Swab, and the glandular study of Fred Dolkeman with the rats should provide more than enough evidence for the belief that homosexuality is in fact an inherent characteristic rather than a choice. So perhaps if more people became aware of this truth, we could put an end to discrimination against homosexuality and realize they are everyday people just like us.